You all grew. There's like 5 people out here before. My name's Rochelle. I'm the Right Now coach. I'm a writing coach and writer from Milwaukee. And next Saturday, we're going to have a writing workshop at Oswald Bookstore at 2 p.m. So if you're thinking about doing NaNoWriMo, you might want to come. We're going to try to create characters and plots and eavesdrop and all that stuff. Well, I'm not very good at following the rules, so instead of writing a novel last year, I wrote a nonfiction book called Write-a-thon, how to write just about any kind of book in 26 days or less. And I did do it in 26 days. So this is a chapter called Moving from Wannabe to Writer from the beginning of that book. When I was in graduate school, we'd often finish classes with the need to attend an attitude adjustment hour at the local bar. Consider this section, and especially this chapter, your attitude adjustment tool. The biggest difference between the wannabe writer and Molly McAuthor is attitude. The wannabe writers have a million excuses, if onlys, and maybe somedays, taking up valuable space in their brains. Molly McAuthor has learned to challenge and overcome her excuses, taking on the attitude that she can and will write, and she does. Here are some of the most common if-onlys and maybe somedays I hear from wannabes, and encouragement from great writers to write anyway. Inspiration. The wannabe writer says, if only I was inspired. Maybe someday the big idea will hit me, and I will write. Here's what Madeline Lingle says about waiting for inspiration. Lots of people, ages varying from 15 to 70, talk to me about the books they could write, if only. The reason they don't get around to writing the books is usually in the young that they have to wait for inspiration, and you know perfectly well that if any artist of any kind sits around waiting for inspiration, he'll have a very small body of work. Inspiration usually comes during the work rather than before it. Jack London says you can't wait for inspiration, you have to go after it with a club. Don't wait for inspiration. Waiters wait, writers write. Time. The wannabe writer says, if only I had more time to write, or maybe someday I'll have the time to put together that memoir. We have the time and energy to do what we choose to do. Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist Carol Shields wrote her last novel while sick with stage 4 breast cancer. She wrote an hour a day. In fact, when her children were young, she wrote only 2 pages a day. She would drop off her 5 kids at school, come home, clean up the mess, write for the hour before lunch, and then edit the 2 pages in the hour before they came home from school or just before bed. Shields wrote her first novel in longhand while sitting in bed each night. She'd write 2 pages fast and then shut off the light. At the end of the year, she had a novel. Anthony Trollope wrote only 3 hours a day and yet was quite prolific. He tried to write 250 words every 15 minutes. He shared his writing life with a job at the post office. Too busy is just another excuse not to write. Procrastinators are too busy. Writers write. Materials. The wannabe writer says, if only I had the right materials. Maybe someday when I get the ultimate writer's computer and writer's program, I'll get that magnum opus together. Joanna Trollope has written every one of her novels in pen on legal pad. Toni Morrison writes her books in pencil on legal pad. Gertrude Stein scribbled her poems on odd scraps of paper. Most of my last book was planned on the back of envelopes. What more could you need? If you're looking for the perfect pen, then I suggest you get a job as a buyer at an office store. Consumers consume. Writers write with any little stub of pencil and scrap of paper they find. Education. Wannabe writers say, if only I had the right education, or maybe someday I'll know enough to write this book. Anne Lamott, best-selling author, dropped out of college to write. J.A. Jance writes every one of her best-selling novels, not knowing what will happen next. She writes to find the answer. Education and knowledge always helps, but you don't need it to be a successful writer. Students study. Writers write. Talent. The wannabe writer says, oh, if only I had more talent. Or maybe someday I'll have the confidence to write. Gail Godwin, the master novelist, says, I work continuously within the shadow of failure. For every novel that makes it to my publisher's desk, there are at least 5 or 6 that died on the way. Erica Young said it this way, everyone has talent. What is rare is the courage to follow that talent to the dark place it leads. Don't worry about having enough talent. Hard work trumps talent, always. Space. Virginia Woolf believed that every woman needed a room of her own. Many wannabe writers use this as an excuse for not writing, putting off their work until their office is built or completed. Mystery novelist Sheldon Rush wrote his first novel at his local Starbucks. A friend of mine recently claimed a small corner of her basement, cordoned off by bookshelves, as her studio, requiring that her small children use a password to enter. One of my clients takes regular weekends away to write her books. All of us crave and need space to write. What separates the wannabe from the writer is the courage to claim it, no matter what. We all have our private lists of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only I were healthier, younger, older, skinnier, more beautiful, smarter, better connected, ready. In the end, the ability to move from being a wannabe to a writer takes one thing: putting your butt in the chair and the words on the paper, no matter what excuse or reason or person tries to prevent you. Cynthia Ozick calls writing an act of courage. E.B. White calls it an act of faith. It is both. Stop excusing yourself and start writing. Thank you.
The book fell open to page 42, only slightly singed out from the explosion. It was nearly dawn before I noticed it, splayed open on my porch, its brittle binding, its pages threatening to self-destruct. I scooped it up and returned to my spot on the upper step, blocking out the sounds of the emergency personnel and the chatter of my neighbors. This book had survived to nearly land on my head, and ignoring its message seemed foolish. I squinted in the dim light, tilted the book toward the flames until I could make out the words. Tip number 36, always expect the unexpected. 3 hours ago, I had expected to get my usual 7 hours of sleep, get up early and finish packing. I expected my dark, quiet neighborhood. Instead, that crazy dream had got me out of bed, and as I stood in my front window, the world exploded. I felt it in my teeth, thought maybe the flash of light had permanently burned my retinas. Blinking, I dialed our cordless phone. The rational girl on the other end asked, "What is the nature of an emergency?" "Boom," I said. She tried a new approach. "What's your address?" My sister had always been the rational one good in an emergency. But my brain kicked in and I realized that if I wanted the fire out, I was the one who had to see to it. "The old bookstore at Main and 3rd, I said. Even before I clicked the off button, I could hear the sirens approaching. I slipped on Tim's shoes and ran outside in my cloud pajamas, still clutching the phone. Debris fell in slow motion, bits dropping here and there, on my roof, on my sidewalk. I stamped out small sparks on the porch, watched across the street as the flames shot out the windows, licking the gutters, orange ash falling like fireworks. A police officer approached and seemed not to notice my crazy hair or my too big shoes. "You should go back in the house, Vicki," he said. I sat down in protest. He seemed pleased I hadn't run off screaming or burst into tears. Guys hate tears. "Can you tell me what happened?" I looked at him like he was the crazy person. "Boom," I said, not having no word for it. He smiled and scribbled something on his notepad. "Are you the one who called us?" I nodded and showed him the phone, having completely lost command of the English language. The noise from the fire drowned out his words. My neighbors gathered at the base of my steps, all watching the excitement, shouting over the firemen and the rumble of the truck engines. It didn't occur to me to leave, to get in my car and evacuate. Instead, I tucked my feet under me, mesmerized, a cat watching goldfish swim amongst bright gravel. Sparks fluttered and I thought about calling Tim. He picked a lousy night to stay over in the city. We were a small town. Our only excitement was the annual popcorn festival and me, not explosions in the middle of the night. I hugged the open book and watched as the roof collapsed. Expect the unexpected.